Juwan Deering, a Michigan man accused of setting a house fire that killed 5 children, was once asked in an interview a question about how the deck ended up stacked against him. We've already discussed some of those answers. Jailhouse informants compensated for their testimony, a prosecutor that allegedly lied in court about the favors offered to those informants, and a fire investigator that ignored the scientific method and leaned on now debunked arson investigation myths to classify the fire as arson. But Juwan Deering offered another theory for how he was so easily convicted for a crime he didn't commit, a crime that may have actually been nothing more than a tragic accident. He said intrigue can overshadow things like the truth at times. And it's true, from Elvis sightings to theories about faked moon landings and even celebrity gossip. Something about intriguing theories gives them a life of their own and helps them spread. And the truth is that when people are aching in the aftermath of tragedy, having a place to direct their rage can provide some small amount of catharsis. But investigators are supposed to act ethically and without bias. The justice system is supposed to be the final system of checks and balances and be a dissenting questioner of the investigation. And justice is supposed to be blind to the allure of intrigue and the influence of bias. But that wasn't Juwan Deering's experience. This is the final installment in our coverage of the Juwan Deering case, but it's not the final chapter in wrongful arson convictions. The errors made in this case are not unique, and others are likely still serving sentences, having been deprived of a fair trial and subjected to investigative errors. This is Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark, sooty landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer and former firefighter.
And I'm Andy McGee, a clairvoyant telekinetic that only pays for cab rides with $500 bills.
Please be sure to check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, follow us on X, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. We love it when you interact with our content and leave us comments, likes, and shares. That helps us grow. And thank you to the few of you that did post new ratings and reviews this week. Those of you that haven't, we just celebrated our 10-year wedding anniversary the day before recording this. And rumor is that 5-star podcast reviews are the new 10-year anniversary gift trend, so get on that trend early and leave us a rating. Already done that? Find a new platform to leave another rating on. This isn't like voting for the president. You can legally rate us as many times on as many different platforms as you want. Finding our audience is hard work, and every little thing you do to help us is a gift. And as always, you can reach out to us with constructive feedback and comments at crimetoburn@gmail.com. Okay, I have one thing we need to discuss before we continue, and it is relevant to the case. Someone on Instagram told me that they saw a video in which Juwan Deering was allegedly drinking some type of liquor, possibly Hennessy, and holding what appeared to be a bunch of menus. And I give you that information to help identify it in case you've seen it. And in this video, he was talking about this fire in a way that came across as incriminating. Now, this person told me he saw this video right before he saw one that I posted about the case, and prior to seeing my video, he didn't know the circumstances of the case or the details of it. So he was looking for that video to send to me and hasn't been able to find it. In response to this information, I posted a video on our social media asking for help finding it, and I spent probably an unethical amount of time this week looking for it myself, and I cannot find it.
Did you at least find a bunch of menus?
No. So I cannot corroborate its existence, even if it does exist, because I've not seen it. I can't say if it could have been creatively edited to take it out of context, even if it is Juwan Deering. But I can't imagine a situation where somebody might have said something like, "They said I set this fire," and somebody cut off the "they said," and it just ends up saying, "I set this fire." So I can't corroborate that this video exists, but I want to bring it up so that if any of our listeners that didn't see my plea for help finding the video know of the video or have seen it, even if you can't find it again, if you have seen it, please email me at crimetoburn@gmail.com. But for now, I am proceeding as though this video doesn't exist because I can't corroborate that it exists. And if somebody finds a video and sends it to me, I will post a follow-up to address it. but it would be important to know if such a video exists because it could have a major bearing on the case. A lot of people think that exonerees are free and clear and nothing can happen related to their cases after exoneration, but that's not true. In Michigan, there's no statute of limitations on murder, and when someone's exonerated, it legally undoes the first trial and makes it like it never happened, but it doesn't find them not guilty. This means that if new evidence were to come to light later, they can be rearrested and retried, and it's not double jeopardy since the first trial was erased. So, if this video exists, and at this point, I am moving forward as though it doesn't, it could be a really big deal. So if anyone finds it, comes across it, whatever, please email it to me. I will post a follow-up if it becomes necessary. Based on the information that we have now, and the information I was able to scare up this week, I can say that I do not believe Juwan Deering set this fire. And I can say with 100% conviction that he did not receive a fair trial. Plus, this week I've uncovered another plausible theory of the fire from some new court documents that I've located, and I've uncovered some additional elements of alleged misconduct on the part of prosecutors and investigators. Now, as always, the allegations of investigative and prosecutorial misconduct are all alleged. No one's been found criminally liable for this alleged misconduct, and that's partly because the law prevents it. Qualified immunity is judicial doctrine that grants government officials immunity from lawsuits unless their actions clearly violated established law. And while it can be argued that they violated laws, historically, judges have notoriously sided with prosecutors and cops in all but the most extreme cases, like the Derek Chauvin case. I think if the prosecutor perjured himself by claiming that he couldn't do anything for these jailhouse informants, then he could and should be held liable, not just criminally, but civilly. That's my personal opinion, and the courts don't really care how I feel. But if enough people felt that way and pressured their legislative representatives, maybe we could push for some legislation that sets some limits on qualified immunity. Now, at one point, a judge threw out a motion to dismiss a civil suit against the prosecutor and investigators, claiming that they had, in fact, knowingly violated laws as well as departmental procedures. However, a higher court overturned that decision. So, to the best of my research and ability, and I'm not a legal expert, it does appear that there was some motions very recently in a civil trial. But I can't say with any certainty if anything's been decided because not all of the docket filings are available for public viewing unless I purchase them, and I've bought a lot of expensive court records recently. And civil outcomes aren't relevant to this coverage, but I really wanted to see some kind of consequence for the prosecutor and investigators. And the fact that the prosecutor accused of misconduct in this case is still listed in the Michigan bar as having an active license that's in good standing, that just really burns me up. If I had violated ethics in the same manner at my job, you better believe my engineering license would be in jeopardy. This wasn't just a mistake. This was blatant violation of prosecutorial procedures and rules by a man that had moved up the ladder to serve as an assistant attorney general in the state of Michigan. And it makes me even madder that the AG's office indicated they were conducting an ethics investigation, and yet there's no information about the results of that ethics investigation.
Doesn't sound like an ethics investigation.
Now, does the state have reason to withhold that information? Sure. Townsend had a 28-year career with the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office, and last week we talked about another case where he's accused of the same kinds of ethics violations, suggesting that this may be a pattern of behavior for him. So this could call into question a lot of his convictions. But I think the results of this investigation should be made public. Michigan, your tax dollars paid his salary. Your tax dollars paid for his ethics investigation, and your tax dollars could be funding a pension for all I know. I think you should be demanding answers, Michigan. And in an effort to try to find out how many cases Greg Townsend had prosecuted and secured convictions, which I wasn't able to determine, I did find that he prosecuted at least one other very huge, high-profile case. Greg Townsend was a prosecutor in the Jack Kevorkian case, where Jack Kevorkian was tried for assisting the suicide of 2 adults with chronic painful medical conditions.
Woohoo! Free to die!
But let's get back to the case at hand, the case of Juwan Deering. I told you that I'd become aware of a new plausible theory of the fire. Based on civil case court records that were filed against the prosecutor and investigators, I have the briefs that were filed by the plaintiff Juwan Deering and his attorneys. It was revealed in those documents that investigators withheld from the defense more than just 13-year-old Timothy Dean's statements about hearing somebody on the front porch, and that somebody was not Juwan Deering but was little Juwan. And this is what I was having trouble squaring in my mind. If Timothy said he heard someone on the front porch prior to the fire, why were they on the front porch? Because witnesses state that the fire started inside. So what would somebody be doing on the front porch?
Proselytizing.
That's possible. But it turns out that Timothy had been maintaining some lawn equipment and brought a container of some kind into the house with gasoline earlier in the evening. And his 4-year-old sister had apparently spilled some of it. But the container was still in the house. And it was reported by Michelle Frame's father, the man that was renting the room upstairs with his daughter. He reported that there was a short circuit in the doorbell that would spark when somebody messed with it, and that the kids would often play with it.
Oh, that does sound cool.
Unless you have a container of gasoline sitting underneath it.
Oh, even then. That just adds to the suspense of the whole thing.
So, is it possible that somebody did come up on the porch, maybe rang the doorbell or messed with the doorbell, caused some sparks, and because there is a gasoline container nearby, it sparked some latent vapors?
What year was this?
This was in 2000.
That's right on the borderline of kids being bored enough to do that.
Well, wait a minute. It's funny you say that. In addition, Michelle Frame's father also told police that at least 2 of the children had recently been caught playing with matches. And members of the household, including Marie Dean and her oldest son, were smokers. Now, her oldest son wasn't home at the time of the fire, but Marie Dean was. None of this information from witnesses questioned in the days after the fire was shared with the defense. And 3 different eyewitnesses told investigators that the fire had started inside the house, but that's not all. Timothy Dean? He had used a diagram to show police where the fire had started, and he knew where the fire had started because he had tried to put out the fire with a cup of water before his mother woke up. Investigators knew the fire started inside the house. They knew it started inside the house because they had Timothy Dean's statement that said, I saw the incipient stages of the fire. I poured water on it and tried to put it out.
No, I wouldn't believe nothing she said because no one knows that word.
It's me. The beginning stages of a fire are called the incipient stages. And Timothy Dean said when he saw the fire when it was still small and tried to put it out with a cup of water. That shocked me that somebody that was in the house told investigators they saw where the fire started. Investigators still went down this path of trying to railroad somebody into a murder conviction.
Because no one can believe you can put out any kind of fire with a cup of water.
He was a kid.
Also, no one listens to kids.
This is true. Now, I already told you that maybe the interview with Timothy Dean, in which he had said it was a different Juwan that he heard on the porch, was inadvertently left out of discovery, because people are human and errors happen. And I was trying to give the prosecution at least some benefit of the doubt, but it seems that this is going to be a pretty tough sell, because prosecutors, they gave the defense half of the recording. They intentionally made a copy of the recording with only the first half of it, and they left the second half of the recording out. So this makes it a little harder to believe that it was an accidental omission. Also, in the second half of the interview, Timothy says that he saw a black Monte Carlo driving away. Deering drove a blue Cadillac Eldorado. And like I said, the most interesting part is that Timothy told investigators that he discovered the fire before his mom woke up and tried to put it out with a cup of water. And how could Timothy have done that if the fire started on the porch? Big Mike was questioned on investigators April 7th, 2 days after the fire.
Do you think they called him Mr. Big Mike when they questioned him?
No, they probably called him Mr. Dean. So Big Mike was questioned by investigators April 7th, 2 days after the fire, and he told them that he owed 9 different drug dealers money. He did say that one of those drug dealers was Deering and that he owed Deering $50, but he also told investigators that Deering had never threatened him over repaying it. Also, recall that Big Mike had been out of the house where Marie and the kids lived for years at this point. Apparently, at the time of the fire, Big Mike was actually in a rehab program, and he unfortunately passed away a couple months after the fire from a heart attack, and some people say it was due to the grief of losing his children. According to Karen McDonald of the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office, after digging into the case, they found lots of evidence of misconduct by their office, and one issue that I had not been aware of until I watched an interview with her is that there is a specific procedure that they were supposed to follow to issue an arrest warrant. And investigators had denied arrest warrants for Deering on at least 3 separate occasions because of insufficient evidence. There was even an inter-office communication uncovered in which Gregory Townsend wrote in this communications stating that he had been told to back off of Deering, and he feared that continuing to push on it could jeopardize his position in the prosecutor's office. However, when this person that had refused to issue an arrest warrant was apparently no longer with the office for some reason, and I don't know the circumstances of that, Townsend circumvented the warrants division and allegedly issued the warrant himself. And Karen McDonald pointed out in the press conference that this was a major violation of policy, especially since he did this after being told at least 3 times that there was inadequate evidence against Deering.
Yeah, but when you're a rock star, you get special treatment.
Remember how I said that investigator Taleigha had discussed the arriving officer's in-car video recording to show that when he arrived on the scene, the porch was fully involved? Well, it turns out that that video had allegedly been doctored, and they had deleted the beginning portion of the video that clearly shows the earlier stages of the fire, which did not support that the fire began on the front porch. So let's get back to those jailhouse informants.
Where did we leave them?
Well, we talked about one of them last week. We talked about Turner last week, and this week we're going to talk about the other 2. Quickly. So Ralph McMorris. He testified at trial that Deering confessed to him when they were both in jail together in 2003. Like the other jailhouse informants, he testified that he received no favors for his testimony. However, the Oakland County Sheriff's Office and the Prosecutor's Office had long-standing informant relationships with McMorris. On April 12th, just months before the Deering trial, McMorris was charged with stealing and possessing a fraudulent transaction device, and he had 8 prior felonies, including assault and fraud. And the notes in his case file explain the plea deal that he was offered. There was a handwritten note that said, D, meaning defendant, is jailhouse snitch on Oak County case, and Greg Townsend will show up for sentencing. Unquote.
You think he'll put that in his resume? Man, the way they just talk about people. It's a snitch. This is our snitch.
Now, similar notes were found in McMorris's parole records, and the following letter was also found in his file. And this is a letter McMorris wrote directly to Greg Townsend. Dear Greg, I hope I did okay at the pre-exam Friday. I tried to keep my composure. Sorry if I screwed up my testimony. I'm due for court Wednesday, 12th of April. And as you know, my charge has to be dismissed at this level or I'm a cooked goose. Please do an off-the-record call to the station chief here or Tony on my behalf. Dave and Gary told me not to worry about it on Friday, but I am a little. Even if they can PFI the charge until a later date, it gives me a chance to do some things for Lieutenant Green of the Genoese County Sheriff's Department, NARC unit, which we can use as a go-between so there's no conflict. I've always fully trusted you, and I always will. Thanks, Ralph.
Oh, Ralph.
Now, further investigative efforts uncovered that Townsend had been using McMorris as a jailhouse informant since 1998. Juwan Deering's trial was in 2006, so that's 8 years. And apparently Townsend wasn't the only one who used McMorris in this manner. He'd been an informant since 1995, and he was able to list over 15 people he testified against as an informant. And at one point, he wrote a letter to a prosecuting attorney in which he talks about his long history as an informant, and this letter includes the following quote. Quote, with the exception of one time, my credibility was unquestionable, and the one time I speak of is an attempt to help put a guy away who killed 5 kids. Unquote.
Oh, that's oddly specific.
Oddly specific. Now, in July of 2012, McMorris admitted that he had been coerced, coached, and incentivized by Oakland County Sheriff's deputies into saying that Deering confessed to him. The investigators had left newspaper articles around for him to read to learn what the investigators' theory of the fire was, and when he was questioned, if he answered a question in a way that didn't align with the theory, they would choreograph his modified response by asking leading questions like, "Are you sure about that?" Again, Townsend outright said in trial that none of the informants received anything for their testimony, which honestly at this point appears to be nothing more than lies. And then there's Turner. We covered him last week, but I have learned that he testified as a prosecution witness during 3 prior unrelated felony trials as a police informant. And then the final informant was a man named Raymond Jeffries. He was incarcerated with Deering from August to September of 2000. The next year, Jeffries was arrested for stealing a pastor's car from a church parking lot and then getting into a high-speed chase with it and wrecking it. Now, the notes in the prosecutor's file state, quote, Cobb to 1 year in jail with 30 days credit, deviation based on defendant, assistant, and multiple homicide arson, OCSD, Royal Oak Township case, end quote. 1 year was pretty lenient considering Jeffries had 13 prior felony convictions and 3 prior misdemeanors and had an open probation violation warrant. He had been facing 5 to 20 years, so 1 year was a pretty good deal. So you see, they were able to snag 3 people to testify, but they actually didn't start with jailhouse informants. They started trying to get people in the neighborhood to fabricate testimony, allegedly. In the days immediately following the fire, detectives Wirtz and Miller interviewed no fewer than 4 people from the neighborhood, and they either tried to strongly suggest that they should name Deering or they tried to outright bribe them to do so. In the most egregious case, it was a man named Delano Rustin. After pressing Rustin to identify Deering as the arsonist, Detective Miller said he was, quote, going to put you in a position you haven't been in before. Miller said he would,
How
quote...
do you know, sweet cheeks?
Miller said he would, quote, keep it confidential, unquote, and, quote, we can pay you a whole ton of money. The money is out there, and that's what we do, end quote. And this was in a video-recorded interview.
We bring you shovel loads of cash. That's what we do.
In another case, they had told one of the neighbors that had a probation violation that they would make some calls on their behalf if they'd be willing to testify. But apparently none of them agreed because all of the informants were jailhouse informants. So all this proves that Juwan Deering didn't get a fair trial, and it was affirmed by the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office as well as an independent investigator. There was not enough evidence to link Juwan to the fire. In addition, Juwan Deering heard police were looking at him as a suspect, so he voluntarily went to go talk to police. He said in an interview on the Clay Kane show on YouTube, which I will link in the show notes, that he did so because he felt he had nothing to hide and the truth would stand. Now, Clay Kane asked Juwan Deering the same question that I asked Christine Bunch. Knowing what you know now, would you have talked to police? And Juwan stated that no, he would never talk to police or investigators without representation. And it would seem that's a wrap on the case. But there is one piece of testimony that I have tried to square in my head, and it's the only statement that at any point made me wonder if Juwan Deering did have something to do with the fire. Ultimately, I have to side with the evidence and say that there's just not enough here to include Juwan as a viable suspect. But let's discuss it. The night of the fire, Juwan was with his friend Darius Coleman. Now, Darius confirms that he and Juwan were hanging out, drinking, smoking some pot, and Coleman confirms that Deering was a drug dealer. On the day of the fire, Coleman's car was broken down, so Juwan was the one doing the driving. Now, they went a few places, and around 8 or 8:30, they got to Coleman's grandmother's house, where they just chilled, watched TV, had some more beer, smoked some, and they were there for several hours. During that time, Deering reportedly got really upset talking about people that owed him money for drugs and hadn't paid up. Then Coleman had to go help get his uncle in bed, and he estimated this was around 11:30. His uncle was disabled from a stroke. And while he was doing that, Deering left. He said that he was going to go walk to the gas station to get power steering fluid, according to Coleman's testimony. And even though Coleman specifically said that he was going to walk to the gas station, in his court testimony, the prosecutor's follow-up question is, so he went driving around to get power steering fluid while you're putting your uncle to bed. And Darius Coleman agrees with this statement, which is clearly not what he just said, so I don't understand how that happened. Then he apparently comes back to the grandmother's house to pick up Coleman and take him to his mother's house. Now, as they turn onto a street that is a cross street to where the Dean's house was, Coleman testified that they could see smoke in the distance, and Deering said, quote, I hope they don't blame me for this. unquote. Now, Coleman says from their location they could see smoke. The house was on fire about a half a mile from their location, but there was no way that Deering could have known that it was a house on fire and not a dumpster or a car or something else. So Darius said that Deering left his grandmother's house to go run this power steering fluid errand around 11:15 or 11:30 and was gone until about 11:55. The fire was reported at 11:47. Now, Darius Coleman did testify that Deering didn't smell of smoke or lighter fluid or anything like that when he returned to pick up Coleman again. And a woman Deering allegedly visited later that night also reported that she could smell beer on him, but not lighter fluid or smoke. Now, the defense harped on this like, oh, he didn't smell like lighter fluid, he must not have used lighter fluid. But I don't recall ever thinking that someone smelled like lighter fluid after lighting a grill. Is that a thing? Have I just not noticed it?
I don't use lighter fluid.
When I was young, I knew people that used lighter fluid that light grills, but I don't recall ever noticing a smell on them afterwards.
I remember the smell of lighter fluid when people use it, but I can't specifically recall saying, oh, person A, B, or C, like specifically smelled like it, right? Oh, right. It might have been around and you get it, right? But yeah, I can remember people smelling like cigarettes or people smelling like booze or something. But
So then they ran into a neighbor that was walking on the street, and they stopped to talk to her. And she had already heard via a phone call that it was the Dean house, and she informed Darius and Deering about the fire. Now, police claim that they couldn't find any gas station that had sold Deering power steering fluid at that time. Coleman didn't see power steering fluid in the car when Deering returned, and I'll agree that buying power steering fluid at almost midnight seems odd to me, but it's not criminal. And what if he paid in cash and had already put it in the car? What if the store didn't keep good records? What if he'd stolen it? Not saying he did, I'm just saying that not having a receipt for power steering fluid isn't some sort of smoking gun that the prosecutor tried to make it out to be. On top of that, we know he went to a lady's home that evening, and some allege it was to engage in some romantic liaison. Now, she was exceptionally uncooperative in court, but it is possible that he'd been to her house and just told his friend that he was going to run this power steering fluid errand. Maybe he didn't want anyone to know he was engaged in an intimate relationship with this woman. In court, she specifically denied any such intimate encounter, but she was not cooperative and was vocal about the fact that she didn't want to be there.
Did she have a squeaky power steering system?
Maybe that's why he went over there. Who knows? Maybe he did go get power steering fluid and then went to her house and forgot it there. Who knows? Like, this was 6 years.
I forget my power steering fluid all over town. I get it.
So let's talk about this for a second. We know police attempted to coerce neighbors to testify against Deering. We know they coerced jailhouse informants. We don't have any evidence that they coerced Coleman to testify, but Coleman was apparently very close to Deering, and they had known each other since they were little kids. So it stands to reason that Coleman may have likely had some similar run-ins with police that Deering had had. Remember, these jailhouse informants were in jail with Deering because he was being held on other charges not related to the fire, and we know Deering and Coleman would drink and smoke pot together. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that Coleman may have testified in return for some sort of promises of leniency if he ever got into future legal trouble. Also, as we know, memory after 6 years is largely unreliable. Maybe they were talking about something else. Maybe they got the timeline wrong.
Maybe you're just stating their safe word.
Maybe he's misremembering the situation entirely. But I wanted to present it because it is the one piece of the puzzle that I can't square completely, and it just struck me as such an odd thing to say. I can't imagine driving on the street past where somebody that I had an issue with lived, seeing smoke and first responder vehicles, and turning to the person in the car and saying, "Man, I hope they don't try to blame me for that." It just seems like a weird thing to say.
Well, you've never grown up in the hood.
I haven't.
Maybe he's just getting some street cred from his little homeboy there.
Totally possible. However, we have multiple witnesses that say the fire started inside the house. And we know there are plausible scenarios for the fire starting inside the house. And knowing how unethically prosecutors and investigators are alleged to have behaved in this investigation and trial, I don't think Juwan Deering did it, even with the weird statement. But I wanted to make you aware of it in the interest of being unbiased. So before we wrap up, let's do a quick review. The investigators are accused of making false statements and material omissions, including not telling the defense or judge that Timothy Dean said Juwan and little Juwan were different people, not telling the judge or defense that Timothy looked at a photograph of Deering and explicitly stated that Deering's voice is not the voice he heard that night, not telling the defense or the judge that there was evidence that the fire was accidental, such as Timothy's video recorded statements, gasoline spilled inside the home on the day of the fire, and children living inside that reportedly played with matches at times. They also didn't report a diagram that Timothy used to pinpoint where the fire started and the location of the gasoline container, not reporting that Timothy saw a black Monte Carlo drive away from the house soon after the fire started, even though detectives knew Deering drove a blue Cadillac Eldorado, and knowing and intentionally misrepresenting fire behavior to classify the fire as arson. And they're also accused of engaging in overt acts in furtherance of their conspiracy, which includes offering neighborhood witnesses compensation, including cash, for their testimony in support of their arson theory. At one point, a witness did tell police that she heard a woman claiming responsibility for the fire, and police never included that interview in discovery. I didn't go down that rabbit hole because I have no idea who she is, and the evidence all seems to point to an accidental fire, in my opinion, but it seems highly suspicious. Prosecutors and investigators are accused of using jailhouse informants that were compensated in the form of leniency in their sentences for other criminal actions in return for their testimony, and while this is not prohibited, lying about it and concealing these offers from the jury is a violation of Deering's constitutional rights. 3 different informants and 3 cases where information was found in investigative files supporting the assertions that these men were compensated for their testimony, while Townsend specifically claimed both in opening and closing arguments that these men had nothing to gain and that they did it for the children. And let's not leave out Taleigha. Quick summary to remind you about his misdeeds in the case. He's accused of deliberately ignoring his knowledge and training about the effects of flashover on the physical effects of fire, including falsely stating that the area of most severe burn is indicative of the point of origin, falsely stating that fire burns upward and outward to justify the conclusion that low burning fire is indicative of accelerant, falsely stating that burn patterns on the floor are indicative of accelerant, falsely stating sharp lines of demarcation are indicative of accelerant, falsely stating that alligator char is an indicator of rapid fire intensification indicating an accelerant, falsely stating the speed and intensity of a fire indicate an accelerant, using negative corpus as part of his analysis knowing it was outdated and unreliable, intentionally disregarding the scientific method, intentionally relying on fire investigation standards that had been debunked by the year 2000, intentionally ignoring witnesses who reported seeing the fire inside the house before on the porch, and relying upon selective witness information and concluding the fire started on the porch in violation of NFPA standards, opining burn patterns were caused by flammable liquid when he knew it was scientifically impossible to reach that conclusion, knowingly concealing accidental ignition sources near his claimed area of origin, stating that he eliminated the electrical wiring as a heat source when in fact he did not examine the electrical circuit's overload protective device, taking and testing debris samples from an area right next to where the charcoal grill was stored and lighter fluid was likely to be found anyway, while ignoring burn patterns to indicate whether an accelerant was used, and selectively relying on one witness, Michael Dean, who stated there was no container of lighter fluid present near the grill, even though other witnesses indicated that such a container did exist.
Are you saying that not following the scientific method is a charge? Were all those charges?
No, they're not charges. They're accusations in the civil case of things that he did improperly. And not following the scientific method and presenting what he presented as scientific evidence when he intentionally didn't follow NFPA 921 is improper investigative technique. It was improper.
So I guess
it wasn't illegal.
Right. So I guess what I'm wondering is whenever they allay these accusations against people and get them on record, does that set some kind of precedent, like, oh well, here it is, and the court record over here showed that you didn't follow an NFPA guideline, or you didn't follow the scientific method? Does somebody use that in the next one and go, oh, look over here where he didn't use a scientific method? Well, this a-hole didn't either.
Well, this wasn't a criminal proceeding that all this information, all these accusations came from.
Civil, right?
This was a civil proceeding.
So in another civil proceeding.
It could be, but again, each civil proceeding is going to be decided based on its individual merits.
But they're still influenced by precedent, right?
They can be influenced by precedent, yeah.
I just find it fascinating because you can You can slip that, like what you just said was a big old mouthful.
It was a lot. Yeah, I went really fast because I didn't want to stay.
Well, there was a lot there. It just seems like if you can get that to fly for one, you can just use that as loft for the wings of all kinds of arguments, right?
Possibly.
That's just my little observation.
Now let's not leave out Oakland County because this is what Deering's attorney accuses them of. Maintaining an affirmative policy of practice of requiring investigators and detectives to keep secret the use of informants and or their offers of leniency in violation of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Conducting inadequate investigations into serious felony cases, knowingly and deliberately fabricating evidence to manufacture probable cause to arrest and strengthen a case for conviction, knowingly tolerating Brady violations, knowingly and deliberately using jailhouse informants to testify against criminal defendants in exchange for leniency without disclosing those promises or expectations of those benefits, failing to have policies and procedures in place, and failing to adequately supervise or train employees in accordance with said policies and procedures, and failing to attend to such policies and procedures to ensure that informants are appropriately tracked, monitored, and their incentives disclosed to criminal defendants, and failing to have policies and procedures in place or to train employees to ensure that all exculpatory and impeachment evidence is provided to prosecutors and defense attorneys and prevent wrongful convictions. So I've provided you with some pretty damning information that might lead you to conclude that the prosecutors and investigators were at best unethical and at worst criminal in their dealings with this case. I definitely have my own big feelings, and it probably doesn't take a lot of interpolation for you to determine what they are, but I leave it to you to form your own opinion, and of course you're welcome to do your own research. I have presented you with other plausible explanations for the fire and evidence from witnesses that seems to imply the fire started inside the home. I leave you to make a decision about whether you think the fire is accidental or arson. In my opinion, Juwan Deering was railroaded by police. He was not fairly trialed, and in my mind, this fire was most likely a horrifically tragic accident. Deering was convicted for 5 counts of first-degree murder, and there's a photo of him in the courtroom right after the guilty verdict was read, and his face in that photo is one of utter shock and disbelief, and it actually breaks my heart to look at it. Now, Juwan Deering served 15 years in prison. His daughters were deprived of the presence of their father during his sentence. He lost family members that died and were buried without him being there to say goodbye. He was deprived of so much that cannot be returned to him, all because of what I believe were the career and political aspirations of an unethical prosecutor and some cops whose actions appear to make them more akin to henchmen than public servants. But Juwan Deering was exonerated. Gregory Townsend was investigated for ethics violations, and I have no idea what happened, if anything, to the investigators. I want to believe that some good came out of this. I want to believe that there's some redemption in this story. And I hope it's that we know better now and can do better. I hope it's that we can recognize the fallibility of our justice system and that we stand up for equality and hold both prosecutors and investigators to higher standards. And I hope we recognize it's past time to put some limitations on qualified immunity provisions and allow prosecutors and investigators to be held legally accountable for their unethical actions. But finally, let's close this out remembering that at the end of the day, a man lost his freedom unjustly, and 5 innocent children died in this fire. Taleigha Dean was 10. Craig Dean was 8. Aaron Dean was 7. Eugene Dean was 5. And Michelle Frame was 11. In addition, let's not forget that just months after the fire, the children's father died, and many said it was a heart attack brought on by his grief over losing his children. And Marie Dean, a mother, lost 4 of her babies. Timothy, Michael, Sasha, and Autumn Dean lost their siblings. The horror of this tragedy changed the trajectory of many people's lives forever. And we remember them, and we pray for their peace and healing, and likewise we pray for healing for Juwan and his family. But Greg Townsend and his alleged henchmen masquerading as investigators can go all the way off.
If you need help, I'm here. I offer a off concierge service.
And there we have the Juwan Deering case. We're done.
Testes. 1, 2.
No, you shouldn't have 3. That's a problem. You should talk to your doctor about 3 testes. You're full of cheese and turning over new leaves.
So full of cheese.
Your sweater's very festive today.
And your sweater is nice as well.
Oh my god, my sweater looks just like yours. We're twins.
What? I hope it's not an implement of torture like the one I received. Because that would be a very ironic gift to give someone. Like, here's a cool sweater, now suffer.
Hey Siri. Who's Andy McGee? So it says, Andy McGee is the deuteragonist and Firestarter in the 1984 film adaptation.
What makes him the dragonist? I know what a protagonist is. I know what an antagonist is. A deuterotagonist?
The person second in importance to the protagonist in a drama.
I don't feel like I'm any closer to understanding. As you can tell, I never went to that theology school. You gotta be really mentally flexible to accept a lot of that nonsense. They managed to get their asshole above their elbow.
I think they just managed to be all asshole.
Look at this. This is asshole. I don't even know what we're talking about. Well, you look hydrated.
So hydrated. I drink a lot of weak tea.
I would be a terrible general. I'm just like, scorched earth every time. This is why I can't have regular conversations with people. I'm just exhausting. It doesn't stink. It just smells like 3-day-old beer. That's how you can tell when someone really likes something. Like, as I serve people a bunch of food, you can tell when they really like it because they'll not make words, just sounds.
All right, what do you say we get going before the angry lamp wakes up? The dog got neutered this week. He's wearing the cone of shame, and so it's like having an angry desk lamp storming through the house.
If you cut my sack open and remove my nanas, like, there's no way I'd be playing with my friends like 2 days later with my sack flapping in the breeze around the yard. I can just see it. I can hear it flapping.
He was still loopy. Remember, I was afraid he was going to fall off the couch.
What made me get out the cheese and put the pill in the cheese?
He's used to having time to go explore and...
But we tried that and he got stuck in between 2 trees.
All he had to do was back up and he would have been fine. Like he would, because that thing is flexible. It would have just, but he didn't. He just stood there and looked at me like, oh, thank God Mom's here, help me.
It's moments like that where you realize not everything deserves to walk around with nuts on it. Feels like I'm wearing an inside-out pine cone.
Well, that's festive too, I guess. It's got Viking Santa on it, and it says, deck the halls with skulls and bodies. Fa la 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 Valhalla.
You missed a law.
Fa la 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 Valhalla.
No, you still missed a law.
Fa la 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 Valhalla.
Now you got it. And if you know the difference between a verb and a noun, you're probably not a Viking. I didn't fall and spasmically flail about in midair before I hugged a landscaping tie for dear life. Should have splurged for the longer nails. And I'm Andy McGee, clairvoyant, and...
Clairvoyant. Winston, move.
Dude, you're too hot. That's like a speaker, that cone. It just projects a sound out there.
Our dog loves to lay in front of the wood stove, but then he gets hot and he won't move away from in front of the wood stove. He just lays there in front of the wood stove panting like he's being baked.
But with the cone, he kind of sounds like Darth Vader dog.
He does. Darth Vader is not what you sounded like there.
the way too late at night Cinemax version of Darth Vader.
I was going to say, you sound like you're an associate of the Hawk-Tuah girl there. And I'm a hyperventilating dog with a speaker on my head.
He's really got the tonal projection going on there. And I'm Andy McGee, a telekinetic psychopath. What the f***? What's the other word?
Clairvoyant.
Clairvoyant telekinetic.
Do $500 bills really exist?
$101 bill.
$500 bill exists. However, it has been officially discontinued since 1969.
These are great mnemonic devices that we're laying down for ourselves in the future. But hey, send us those videos when you find them. And if you can't, at least send us videos of you dripping molten wax on your nipples, because that would be something.
What are you doing?
Don't worry about me. What are you doing?
I'm trying to find my spot again. I was distracted. Pardon us while our lamp shifts positions.
He's got excavated himself a spot. Wisconsin's really cool.
I've never been. Wait, have I been to Wisconsin?
So it's perfectly homogenously cut grass with no trash. It's utopia. I didn't know how much I like cheese curds. Because after someone dies like that, you can't make gravy jokes and shit, right?
I mean, he had a crack cocaine problem. I feel like that probably contributed to any.
I feel like crack cocaine is a gateway to gravy.
Huh. I eat gravy and I've never done crack cocaine.
Well, you can use butter in gravy. Did you know that? And then what's beyond gravy?
Aioli.
It goes gravy, aioli, heart disease, whatever that thing is that eats you from the inside out and then pops out and does a little dance.
I don't know what that is.
Space herpes. Relax your face bones, because your face bones look like they're about to collide into each other like tectonic plates. You know what happens then? Face quake. I don't mean to wax all scientific on you.
Or purse peanuts. So
Dracar Noir.
Hang on, we have to wait for the lamp to get comfortable again.
There's a whole lot of douchebaggery in the world.
Drop it like it's hot. Oh wait, that's different. So what kind of festive mess should we get into tonight? And there's eggnog. I'm going to get all up in that.
Rick Moranis was harsh in Ghostbusters, man. He was great. He's one of my personal heroes.
Because he left Hollywood to raise his children?
No, just because he's short and it didn't really matter. Well, after you hear him talk for a minute, you don't really want to shove him anymore. But you just look at the guy. Your first impression is, oh, I got to shove that guy. I keep thinking you're talking about Pete Townsend.
No,
that's
different.
Not, yeah.
Oh my gosh, you should see Greg Townsend's LinkedIn picture. It is so, it makes me angry. Well, I don't know why. It just looks so
lay it
freaking
on me. Let me make
pompous.
I have I do a thing with first impressions and body language. My AI is trying to make me kinder and gentler on my delivery of things.
This is his LinkedIn profile picture.
Right away, he looks like the elder of a cult. He also looks like he may have very large front teeth for biting nuts and things. He sort of looks like a woodland creature in a way. Like he might wash his hands like this. Wash his face, not wash his hands, his face. You know those little creatures that grab their face and they go... Looks like he's definitely tasted some nuts, though.
And his earlobes piss me off.
He's hiding something for real.
He definitely looks like he's hiding
more
something
than his hairline.
Oh yeah, he is hiding his hairline. That's a very Trumpy comb over.
It is a Trumpy comb over. Do you think he's wearing makeup, or do you think that's a natural cheek highlight?
No, I think he's in the harsh lighting of a courtroom here, and there's fluorescent lights down over him, and it's giving him the hollow cheek thing.
It's highlighting his shame.
Yeah.
He has shameful nostrils. That doesn't really make sense. Like secret sex lips, but nostrils.
If his earlobes weren't detached from his face, he could jump out of trees like a flying squirrel.
No, he could breathe underwater if his earlobes weren't detached from his face.
How would he breathe underwater?
Because that's where the gills would be.
Oh.
They're not big, they're devious.
Devious nostrils.
Yeah.
It's different than a deviated septum.
That's nobody's fault. But the way he's holding his nostrils, it's like he's used to being up in the gooch.
If he flares his nostrils at me,
That's an indicator, right?
Yeah. Or if he snarls his lip, because that's an open sign of contempt.
Yeah, I don't know how Elvis survived. Now we'd see that as a sign of aggression. back then it just dropped panties off. Now it's like, dude, what are you thinking? What?
A pot of cheese and disappointment.
Was it a pot or a pan? I guess it was a pot.
And now I know I don't particularly like cheese fondue. I didn't know before today. Yeah.
This is just from, I grew up on the rich side of town, so I'm used to like a lot of variety in my fondue.
I do love some chocolate fondue though. You pour chocolate over things, I'm gonna lick them. Is it time to put more wood on the fire?
Mm-hmm. And flip the dog. Just get a little cooked on this one side, probably.
Oh, the arc encounter. I thought you said the arcing counter.
No, that's welding. That's different. You're full of random thoughts.
I'm also full of song lyrics that are wrong.
That's also true.